Hey, this is Paul Pope, comic book creator behind such award-winning books as Battling Boy, Batman Year 100, Heavy Liquid, 100%. You are listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 198 of the Oblivion Bar podcast. I am Chris Hacker, one of your co-hosts here, and joining me is my BFF, Aaron Knowles.
Saw, dude.
What is up? What is up? What is up?
Saw,
Welcome,
dude.
everybody. Saw, dude. Everybody, thank you so much for being here this week. As you can see, as you clicked on this episode, you already know what's happening. Big guest today. We are joined by the one and only Aaron, Paul Pope. Now, we've talked about this a little bit in private, but I do want to share with the listeners here that when we were approached to talk to Paul Pope. I'll just say that personally.
What? Yeah, exactly.
That's a shameless brag, I will say. Humble brag. And
it feels good when they come to you.
That's yes. And it was an easy yes. It was an immediate yes. And when they asked us to sort of center our conversation around a particular topic, which was his actual exhibit over at the Philippe Lebon gallery there in New York City, I was like, double yes. Like, of course, why would I not want to talk to Paul Pope about his month-long exhibit there in New York City? So a lot of people who are playing this episode probably already know who Paul Pope is, but just as a quick refresher, and I go over it quite a bit during the actual conversation, Aaron, 100% Escapo, Battling Boy, THB, Heavy Liquid, Batman Year 100, many other things. Paul Pope, one of the singular voices in comics, and what an absolute pleasure it was to get him here on the Oblivion Bar podcast. And Aaron, I'll warn you, I'll warn the listener here, and I mean this with a giant grain of salt. This conversation is a little erratic, okay? It's a little bit all over the place, and I think anybody who has been listening to the Oblivion Bar for a long time, that will tell you that I have a pretty strict transcript. Aaron, you know this, of course. I like to stick to the questions, right?
Some might call him a little anal.
Yeah, that's very true.
But that's okay. We call him type A.
Yeah.
And I'm used to that.
You've adjusted, and I appreciate you for doing that. Yeah. But Paul, him and I meeting for the first time, and we immediately hit it off the moment we got on camera together. I had to hurry up and press record because he was one of those guys that wanted to start talking immediately, which is so great.
Doesn't wait for it.
Right. But this conversation, we go down a lot of, what do you like to call it, Aaron? You call it
side quests?
Side quests. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. We got a lot of side quests. Yeah. I'm very grateful for that because this experience with Paul Pope is one that I think, and I'm not trying to butter him up or, this conversation up too much, is one that I will remember for as long as we have the show, for as long as I live, because what an incredible guy. Just immediately, just super warm, very inviting, very open, generous with his time, all the things, excited to talk about this exhibit there at the Philippe Lebon. Just incredible. And I'm very excited.
I feel like you're giving him yes, credit is deserved and credit goes where it's due. Yeah. But I got to say that, Chris, you're one of those people. And I think that, we just recently got a couple of compliments from our Patreon members that we are good interviewers. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's because not only, especially in this context, not only do we interview well, but we're also we're good listeners. We're people, and people want to open up to you. They want to open up to me. And we have great conversations because people aren't just stuck in these rigid, they want to ask the same thing. Who's your favorite superhero? Who's the favorite hero that you've done? What do you want to do? Who's your dream team when it comes to creating a book, etc. Yeah. No, we care. And we generally are want to know more about the people that we're talking to, and they know that, they can sense that. And I think it puts them at ease because there's so many conversations they could be in, and they don't do what happened during this conversation, which is go on those little side quests, segue into weird things, talk about, murder, sex, gore stuff with, Patrick Horvath, etc. Like we can ask these questions because they know that we're not asking out of a weird place or just to get the interview done. We're asking because we're fans. Mm-hmm. And I think that was communicated very well in this interview because he opens up to you so easily.
Yeah. If we're going to fart sniff a little bit here, I will say that we like to do a little, there's a lot of grab ass in our conversations. I'll say that. It's a lot of joking around. It's a lot of just, when we reach out to creators, everybody that's listening, we don't often frame it as an interview. We frame it as a conversation. Like when I reach out to publishers, I'm like, would so-and-so like to come on for a conversation? Where there are going to be questions that are sort of formatted in an interview style. But I think where we slightly differ from maybe other shows, I think David Harper does a really good job of this. Brad and Lisa over at Comic Book Couples Counseling, Botter over the Short Box, many others, where it's framed as a conversation. I think that that's a lot more enjoyable than, as you said, asking them if you could pick between Batman and Spider-Man, who would you rather draw or write or whatever. That's just not interesting. It's not fun conversation. I'd much rather talk about a lot of things that we talk about in this conversation with Paul, which is like, he is known as, Aaron, and I don't know if you know this or not, he's known as the Comics Destroyer. That's his nickname in comics. And that nickname comes from the fact that he has this desire to not play into those worn out tropes within comics, to not follow the same path, take the road less traveled. And I've always respected that about his career. And that's actually the first question that we get into when we sit down together, Paul and I. And he gives an incredible answer. And then again, as I mentioned a moment ago, it just kind of goes all over the place. And I'm sure you guys can probably feel that I keep trying to pull Paul back in, and then he just keeps going back out. And this is not a complaint. I'm so grateful for him.
Clearly jazzed.
I was just happy to be there with him. And I think people are going to really, really enjoy this conversation with, again, 5-time Eisner winner, New York Times bestseller, one of the greatest, and I'm not saying this lightly, Aaron, capital G, greatest comic book creators of all time, Paul Pope. So,
well, let's end the preamble. Let's go through the housekeeping notes and get to this conversation, buddy.
Let's do it. Okay. If you want to, actually, I'll tell you what, Aaron, since you're not in the conversation, why don't you tell the folks how they can support the podcast?
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Actually, if you want to support the Oblivion Bar, if you want to support the Oblivion Bar podcast, you can consider checking out our Patreon. For your support, you can gain access to bonus episodes each week, which we call The Grid, which we actually recently got just done doing. Mm-hmm. A behind the scenes look at how we prepare for each episode, each conversation, with our show notes, our transcripts, so you can see those. Patreon polls, giveaways, exclusive goodies, comics, etc. We have so much, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think of this conversation, because we have conversations with our Patreon members, aka our programs over on The Grid, and it's a great time, all the way down to New Zealand. So give it a shot with a 7-day free trial at patreon.com/OblivionBarPod, or you can check out the link in the show notes. But either way, get over there, check it out. It's a good time.
Yeah. Last thing I'll do to set up this conversation is wait for when Paul starts talking about Mobius, everybody. I think I don't need to really say anything else besides that. Just there is conversation about Paul and his conversations with Mobius at one point when Mobius was still around. And I think that alone, along with, again, everything else that we get to, is well worth it for this conversation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this conversation with Paul Pope.
This episode is brought to you by Oni Press. If you're craving for comics that defy the ordinary and a publisher that not only allows, but encourages its creators to tell their story the way they want to, look no further than Oni Press, the loudest thing in color since 1997. For those who like their comics to have a supernatural twist, Plague House, from good friend of the show Michael W. Conrad and undiscovered genius in 2024 Ringo Award-winning artist Dave Chisholm, is an excellent choice. The first issue was awesome, and the second issue comes out May 7th. Did I mention that Dave Chisholm is a genius? And we already know how much you love Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. We know I do. But be on the lookout for the first issue of Dark Regards from multi-hyphenated writer, comedian, actor, musician Dave Hill and breakout artist Artyom Topolin. This first issue tells a tale of how one stand-up comedian forged a secret online identity as America's first true black metal icon and accidentally started an international incident that almost wiped Gary, Indiana, off the map. And as somebody who has been to Gary, not all of that quote-unquote incident sounds horrible. Dark Regards #1 hits shelves on May 14th. Whether you're into historical fiction about the escape from Alcatraz or into futuristic billionaire murdering power fantasies, or say you just really love Rick and Morty and Adventure Time, Oni Press has something for you. Discover more at onipress.com or visit your local comic shop today.
And now, this week's special guest.
Joining me today is the 5-time Eisner Award-winning comic book creator, New York Times bestseller, and one of the singular voices in the medium of comic books. His work includes 100%, Escapo, Battling Boy, THB, Heavy Liquid, and Batman Year 100. It is my absolute honor to welcome the one and only Paul Pope onto the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
What an honor, man. It's so great to have you here on the Oblivion Bar podcast. Thank you so much for taking some time to come here and chat with us. And, to be honest, I'd love to start our chat, this conversation, with a little bit of an examination of a nickname that I've often seen attached to you and your work, which is the Comics Destroyer. All right. You've said in a conversation with Hazlitt back in 2021 that you had a desire to discard all inflated and worn out edicts, which only serve to keep the medium of comics in stasis. So with resources to aspiring comic creators that seemingly are everywhere in 2025, my question for you is, do you think young creators should be following any specific playbook on how to get into comics? Or do you think there continues to be value in the rebellious, walk the road of less traveled route?
Great question to start with. I don't think young cartoonists need to think too much about what it is they're supposed to be. When I started out, when I was a kid in school, I remember I sat down one time with my sculpture professor. We were doing clay sculptures and metal and stuff like that. And he's like, well, what do you want to be? And I'm like, well, I think I'm a romantic realist, because I think when you're a kid, you always think like, I have to be this or that. And he's like, no, you're not. You're not old enough to know what you are. Just experiment. Just try things out. And that's what I would say to young cartoonists, because, comics looks really alluring and, kind of like sexy, I guess you'd say, like from the outside, but it's actually a lot of work. So unless you're willing to kind of like get into the meat and potatoes of it, I wouldn't recommend it. You might be better off as an art director. Mm-hmm. Or an advertising person, a photographer, it could be a lot of things. So I think when you're a young artist, I think it's important to just experiment and try to find what fits. And you can define yourself later. You don't need to decide what you are.
Sure. Yeah. What are your thoughts on like the emulation of I would say writers, artists, inkers, just anyone in the comic book medium? They find a hero they really love and they just very closely follow that track, whether it be house style or otherwise. Is there any value in that in the beginning? Or do you find that at some point you do have to find your own road and find your own voice?
It's a great question. I think it depends on what type of artist you want to be. In my case, I wanted a hybrid style that had a bit of the European masters, Japanese masters, American masters. And I just tried to find like a new voice, a new idiom. Some people they just really wanted to draw, or at least in the old days, they wanted to draw like John Byrne, or they wanted to draw like Frank Miller. And so they found a style which worked because they got the jobs that Frank Miller didn't want.
Sure.
But I think the challenge is to find a voice that's different. Like why did Moebius decide to become Moebius? He already had a successful career as a Western cartoonist, Jean Giraud. He already had that. He worked in a tradition in Europe, but there's something in him. It broke out of the shell, and it was like he has to become something different. I think Kirby did the same thing. He could have easily had a career just making Captain America for the rest of his life. He kept going, and that to me is the interesting ingredient, the germ of comics, the thing that makes it a very special medium, and I've always tried to stay true to that.
Yeah, it's pretty prevalent too. I think anybody who's followed your career through the last 3 decades, they could tell you that there is no other Paul Pope. And I don't think that, I don't know if anyone's really trying to necessarily try to follow that same track. But I really, honestly, I'm so incredibly impressed, not only with your knowledge of the medium and how much you know your heroes, and we'll talk about some of those here in just a moment, but how much you purposefully stray away from that route. That was something I really wanted to key in on this conversation, is how you are aware of the greats, you know their print in the medium, and yet you have almost dug your own hole just in this corner over here in the comic medium that is so you. It's just you by yourself.
Wow, it's crazy. I've never thought about this, but all of them, if I take three of my Mount Rushmores, Frank Miller, Toth, Alex Toth, and Moebius, they all said the same thing. I never met Kirby, sadly. They all said the same thing. They said, don't do what I did. Like, just go your way. Go your own way. Go your own way.
Yeah.
And I took that seriously. I was like, wow, it's amazing. Like, I got to meet one of my heroes. And like, he told me, don't do what I did. Okay, well, I'm going to go think about that for a bit. And then I'm going to listen to some jazz. And I'm going to listen to some, I don't know, Soundgarden, whatever it might be. And then, like, think up something new. And I think that's what they did, right? Because, like, for example, Frank Miller loves Milton Caniff, and so do I. You know, the classic American cartoonist. Right?
Oh, I have a question about Milton here in just a moment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, great. I'm glad. Okay, so I preempted it. Good. So Frank and I sat down together. We're looking at Milton Caniff. He's got a piece in his house. I'm like, look at this, like how he did that. And it's like this certain technique he had with brush. Like, how do you think he did that? And we talk about it, and it's like his approach to that same style is different from mine. But it's like we're both looking at this apex cartoonist. And it's like, man, it's like, I don't even know if he remembers, but he told me, like, don't do it like I did.
Yeah.
Do it your own way. And that's what I say to younger guys when I meet them all the time. Guys, sorry, I'm Gen X. This is what we say, but
you can say guys here.
Younger cartoonists.
It's just a broad. Here's the thing: we're both Midwest guys, like we're actual guys, but like being in the Midwest, everyone's a guy. Everything's a Coke or soda. Like it's a broad term. You know what I mean?
Okay, good. Okay, good. Yeah. I grew up in Ohio. We can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And you mentioned Milton Caniff a moment ago. I have to say very quickly, and I know if the listeners listening to this are watching this on YouTube, they'll be able to see this. But I'm currently wearing one of your friend's shirts here, which is Bill Sienkiewicz here. It's a classic Hulk.
Oh yeah.
Spider-Man.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you can see this here, but I actually have Moebius here on my arm from Silver Surfer Parable.
Beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I'm obviously a big fan as well. And, speaking of, again, we're going to you perfectly set me up for the Milton Caniff conversation here. You've mentioned obviously many times a major influence on you and your work. I've even seen, and I don't know if you've ever talked about this, I'm sure you have, a little bit of his signature typography in your signature as well. Is that purposeful?
It is. Yeah, because that's something Alex told me early on. He's like, look, kid, if you're going to try to be a cartoonist, you have to be able to letter. And he's like, it's going to be as hard as it is to cartoon. And he's like, just practice. And he's like, literally, it was like, I feel like I was talking to my granddad. Practice your A's, practice your B's, practice your C's. And they're terrible. And I'd send them to him and I'd be like, how does this look? He's like, well, this is okay, but like, you could do this better over here. And, there was a point where I feel like when we work in Marvel or DC, mainstream comics don't really do hand-lettered comics too much anymore. Unless it's an unusual situation like I made when I did Wednesday comics. I made an argument for why it should be badly lettered. But otherwise, it's pristine. And people just read comics with comic book lettering, which is part of an idiom now that people speak. And I don't think they think too much about whether or not it's hand-lettered or something. But also, I'm dyslexic and I'm left-handed. So because I write and draw with a brush, I have to work from the right side to the left side. So I learned how to write backwards.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. That is cool.
But it's also useful because that means that your autograph can never be replicated.
Sure. Yeah. And I've actually seen you sign some of your work. You obviously did that incredible, as we just spoke about, that really amazing Paul Pope typography. But then also you often will stamp it with a red stamp. I was curious what that was.
I have a number of them at this point. It's what they call a hanko. It's a Japanese stamp. I've got a number of them. I'll grab one, in fact, right now.
Sure.
Hang on, I'll grab it in a second. Back in the day, the tradition of Japanese woodblock printmaking meant that every time you sold a print, the person who bought the print from you or the gallery that bought the print from you had a stamp, which was sort of like an executive's sign, say like, yes, this was bought by this gallery, etc., blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And in the old days, the artists would have a block and they would break it after a certain point. So it's just kind of a tradition I picked up. Well, this is my latest. It's Chinese actually, but it's the same idea.
Wow.
I wanted a larger print.
Sure.
You can buy if you're a cartoonist, you want to buy one online, you can buy these. My first ones I actually got in Tokyo. And then, you just get a little thing of like the oil-based red ink and red paint, and then you stamp it. And then, that lasts forever.
That's amazing. I love that. And I think now that I think about it, because I've seen David Mack a couple times at comic shows, he does that as well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so incredible. And it's so unique too.
It is. I think it's becoming a little more commonplace, but I think like Mac and I, we're like cousins of art. And, I think he and I gravitated toward the same type of thing. And there's something about Japanese printmaking that's so organic and so interesting. And then to really dive more deeply into the history of what it means to have an imprint or a stamp on a print or a piece of art, it shows the history of where it goes. And even the Impressionists had that as well. I think that's the beautiful synergy between European and Japanese work or Asian art in general would be when the Europeans started to see Japanese like flat printmaking and the kind of stuff that inspired Degas or Marie Cassatt, these different artists that, were really great. It's continuing back and forth between the lineage, it's like fireworks toward you, fireworks toward me, fireworks toward you.
I feel like this speaks to a larger theme that I've seen, doing research for this conversation. I've heard you talk a lot about how you like to capture this sort of emotion with your work. It's something like, I think in a conversation I read from you were talking about how work that you did when you were a kid and when you were a teenager and then when you were in college or just as an adult. And then as you continue to work as an artist, there's a lot of value in each of those because your perspective has changed with each one of those pieces. And I just found that so interesting. And then I feel like this speaks to a larger, with the stamp as well. It just speaks to sort of the building blocks of being an artist.
Yeah, for sure. I think about it, like I pay attention to my dreams and I read Carl Jung and, pay attention to this type of stuff. And like, I think about the sort of stuff I dreamt about when I was a kid and like how that did evolve over time. And like, there was a phase when I was maybe 12 or 13 and I was just enamored with John Byrne and, Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum. And that was like my sense of like grandiosity and like mythology and things. And then you get a little older, you start reading other things and then like new influences start coming in, but you don't lose that early thing. That thing still stays there. So it's like, okay, I'm going to keep building on this. And so you're right. It's interesting that you bring that up because the stamp is sort of like, this is who I am now. And this is what I've done. Yeah. This is everything I am at this point. Boom. And then if you're bold enough, you break the block. And then it's like, after this point, no more blocks will be signed at this point.
Just what an incredible stamp on that point there,
yeah.
Right? Like a physical, like a metaphorical and physical stamp on this whole thing is that, and I don't want to compare the two, but like this podcast to me feels like each episode is like a miniature stamp because I'm building off of my knowledge and my love of the medium with each one of these conversations. Our very first interview in Oblivion Bar history was in 2020, and it was with Philip Kennedy Johnson, writer, relatively newish writer in the medium. And I remember thinking, man, I was so nervous and just unsure and very just insecure even in that conversation. I felt really prepared, but still just didn't feel like I had the goods, And then here I am today, 5 years later, on July 1st, 2025, talking to, and again, I don't mean to butter you up too much here in this conversation because I want to continue to have a normal conversation, but.
No, I'm cool, dude. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Yeah. I'm cool. Paul, I know who I am.
There you go. I love that. There you go. That's what I wanted to hear. Paul, you were the man.
I know who I am.
Yeah. One of my old timers, and I felt totally confident. I even thought about it right before you popped on camera that like, I'm just excited to pick your brain, which is crazy to think that like there's that growth there, and I think everyone can take something from that.
Well, same with me, man. I remember there was a time when I was hanging out in the 90s when I went to San Diego Comic-Con. Brian Talbot, remember him? He did that book called One Bad Rat.
Uh-huh.
And he's kind of in the Alan Moore, umbrella of artists. And he just looked so cool. I was like, man, this dude looks cool. And he was like wearing a black silk shirt, black slacks, nice hair. And here I am on Scruff from Columbus, Ohio, listening to my grunge and whatever the fuck we did back then. I'm like, man, one day I'm going to be a cool guy like that.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just happy to sit at the table and then like talk to him about Steve Ditko.
Sure.
Or whatever we talked about.
I think you've gotten there, Paul. Honestly, I'll be. I don't.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. I want to go back though just a little bit because we got a little off track with the stamps because we were talking.
Sorry.
No. I'm so happy we did. I'm glad we went down that path because we were talking about Milton Caniff. I also wanted to bring up a couple other influences that I've found again through your multiple conversations. You're so generous with your time when you sit down with different magazines and other podcasts and such. I've heard you talk about Hugo Pratt as someone. You've already mentioned Mobius, of course, and our shared love of his work, but also Tendanori Yoku was one that I also saw that his design work is a big influence on you. And while I think it's fair to say that your art style is, distinctive and very much yours, I'm curious, while you were finding your voice as a young artist, can you remember back to one of the very first moments where you impressed yourself with your own work?
Ooh, that one's tougher. I think, I don't think I can quite pinpoint where it is. I can pinpoint something like Tendanori Yoko, or like if I'm looking at Andy Warhol, or somebody like that. I can be like, oh, I can finally draw like them, or I can make color like them. I think it would be something like I think the real secret challenge with cartoonists, if you get them to really take the scales off and like actually talk about it, it's when you can draw what you really think. That's the hardest thing. Because like I have an idea, but like one of the hardest things for me to draw is a vehicle, a motorcycle or a car. And of course, here I'm sadist, I'm drawing those old types. So it's like, okay, well, how do I get better at this? And it's like eventually, like I used to sit down, man. Like when I was in school, everybody in the glass blowing department in my building at Ohio State, they all had motorcycles. Those tough guys, all of them. And I'd sit outside looking at their bikes and like trying to get their engines correct and everything. And every once in a while, a guy'd come out and he'd be like, oh, well, what are you drawing there? This is a twin cylinder BMW. Okay, cool. Let's sit down and take a look at it, And eventually I made the Batmobile, right? Or my version of the Batmobile. So it's like trying to understand everything about that material object that makes it real. And it's like, okay, well, if I can draw that, because I wasn't trained in like, CAD or mechanical arts or something like that. So if I can see this as it really is, then I can draw. And then I can look at a flower and what's the difference between a begonia or a rose, like these kind of things. And it's like to see those things. And I think that's really what is interesting about drawing, because it's perception, and perception is thinking, right? So yeah, that's what I see.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it totally makes sense because as someone who is not artistic at all, I know it's a muscle. It's something that you have to train and work at. I feel like as someone who's loved art, but specifically comics, I can tell you when I think of a great piece in my mind, and many people come to mind immediately, I know for a fact that I wouldn't even be able to do like a rough sketch of that, like in this moment, even though I can see it perfectly in my brain. I can see, like, for instance, you just spoke about Frank Miller a moment ago. I can see that iconic scene with him and with Batman, The Dark Knight Returns Batman with Robin sort of going through the air. But could I recreate that? Absolutely not. So I think that's an accomplishment. That's a huge accomplishment.
I guess so. I mean, like, but think about this. Like, if you your real life, you walk out and you meet people. Some people have some very interesting stories, and like you get into some sort of conversation and they tell you something like, oh, well, this one time this power cable hit my cousin and almost knocked his eyeballs out, but didn't. And you hear like, whoa, I want to hear this story.
Yeah.
And you hear these crazy stories that people live. or maybe something a little bit more mundane. Like we worked in the kitchen and I cut my finger. I was slicing garlic or something,
Yeah.
but it's still a story. And I think the cartoonist mindset is the person who, like, you might hear a story like, point A, point B, point C. And then you might say like, okay, I'm seeing exactly everything that they're describing.
Mhm.
And then like, I'm composing it in images. And then every once in a while it's like, okay, wait, this one's good enough. Like, I think this one I can use. Or it's like, this is more like a language, a visual, auditory language that we call comics.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that isn't that one of the biggest strengths of the medium, right? Is that you're getting a collaborative view of a story that, when you're reading a prose novel, you're having to visualize what things are in your brain as you're reading it.
Mm-hmm.
But in comics, you're reading / seeing. And in your case, it's all coming from you. But in most cases, it's a sort of a collaborative effort. I just find that so special in that you're seeing exactly what team wanted you to see.
It's funny you say that because everybody loves Tolkien today. But he wrote an essay against illustrating books for children. And I forget the name of the essay. I've got a copy of it around the corner here. But basically it was saying, okay, if I'm the writer, I'm going to suggest an idea, a concept, and let the child come up with the idea. So his example, I think it was called Unreal Estates, Aldous Huxley, Brian Aldiss, and Tolkien. They're just having drinks at Oxford somewhere and talking. And the idea was, it's unfair to suggest to children too much information about, like in this case, it was a man sat at a table and ate bread. And he said, if you illustrate this, it's going to be a specific man sitting at a specific table with specific bread. But if you just give the kids the most basic things, they'll come up with all of the different pictures. And now here, you and I, fast forward, we're grown-ups, right? So yeah, we read comic books and people love details on Iron Man's costume or Wolverine's costume. So they kind of want that. So you wouldn't say something like the mutant walked into a boxing match.
Sure.
And faced the fat guy.
I'm thinking Blob, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, Blob. Yeah, exactly. Which I love that scene, by the way.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying.
From is that Wolverine Origins? Maybe, I think possibly. Yeah.
Only good scene in the movie. Terrible film.
That's right.
No, but I mean that's the thing. That's what's interesting though, because like if you look at the contrast here, is a writer like Tolkien is saying like I don't want any visual description for the characters, but then in comics we definitely have that. I mean, like Wolverine. I just looked at the original character design for Wolverine, in fact. And it's like, okay, well, he looks like this. He's got, this type of costume. It's yellow and blue and these marks. And it's very important you get this correct. It's not like a scroungy little Canadian walked into a woods to fight the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, gosh, what's this guy look like? The Wolf Man. Might never be a human at that point, It's an interesting thing to think about.
Absolutely.
Art is never wrong. It's never wrong. It's like, if an artist kind of like steers the boat, maybe it's going to look or feel a certain way. Like, sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No. I love it. Bring it on.
Okay. I read the Tolkien novels multiple times, and there were very few physical descriptions of orcs. Very few. Okay. And he invited you to imagine what an orc looked like. It had descriptions of like greasy black fur and big tongues and their eyes glowing in the dark and things. But there's not a lot of description. Whereas like when we look at comic books, it's like we have the latest version of like, let's say Bucky Barnes or Captain America or, whoever you want. They have specific looks. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that comics does very well. But literature or, like young adult stuff, it doesn't do that too much. It leaves like holes so kids can imagine stuff like that.
Absolutely. We had Brian K. Vaughan on the show last year, and he mentioned that the best artists, or I would say maybe even the best creators in the industry in comics, are the best actors. He says Fiona Staples is one of the best actors, and she can tell you everything the character is thinking in their head in a panel with 0 word balloons. And I found that really fascinating. And I tend to agree even.
I think it's true because I think if you really think about it, having worked on, as they say, behind the camera,
mm-hmm.
It's not easy to shoot something, it's hard. Comics, you kind of take on every single role that filmmaking does, but you're doing it in a kind of a microcosm. So you don't need 100 actors. You don't deal with egos. You don't have to get a fire marshal. You don't have a lighting guy. You don't have a DP. You don't have an editor. You're the director, I guess. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. Honestly, one of the most fun things at the job is coming up with new sound effects.
You are the absolute master of the automatopoeia, I'll tell you.
But I sit there and I think about it. I'm like, okay, what is this? Well, that's the thing. That's the weird thing about manga. I remember there was one sound effect I saw when I was working in Japan. For the sound, we don't have this in English, but there's the sound of a pencil rolling down a table.
Okay.
And gonna fall off. And it was something like total. So It's like the sound of something rolling. And then we have this myth in North American English that, Inuit had 12 different words for snow. Maybe that's true. I mean, I don't know for certain that it's true or not. But it makes sense, though, because everything could be identified by a word
mm-hmm.
or a sound, a word sound, which is what sound effects are, right? So I'm always trying to find new ones because, of course, we have snap and bang and boom and crackle and pop.
That's right. I was rereading Batman Year 100 in preparation for this conversation. And here's a couple that I just opened up to immediately. Everyone here, I'm just going to list out all the automatopoeias or sound effects from just this random page within Batman Year 100. We've got tap, tap, yank, polka, 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 rat, tat, 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 foop. And that's FWOPP.
You always got to,
I mean, it's just,
you always got to spell it wrong.
Right.
That's the way to make it yours.
All right. Well, here's the thing, Paul. We've gotten about 30 minutes into this conversation and we have not talked about your exhibit at all, which is the reason why you're here today is to talk about your exhibit over at the Philippe Le Bon.
Philippe Le Bon. Yeah. Well, I think what we're talking about is the mechanics of cartooning.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think it's valid.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's talk about the gallery.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. They're spending what is it, about a month celebrating you and your work, a little bit over a month, actually. The exhibit, it opened on June 19th and will be open until July 26th. And this is how it's being advertised. It's being advertised as a showcase that spans a 3-decade career across comics, illustration, and design. It will feature a curation of never-before-seen originals and homages to some of his own personal favorite pieces, his being Paul Pope, while also serving as both a retrospective and testament to his enduring legacy on comics. So, Paul, my question for you is, how did this event come about with Le Bon? And then also, what has that planning process been like for you?
Oh, God. Well, I met Philippe when he opened the gallery. So we know each other, and my girlfriend knows Philippe. And when my second art book, Paul Pope 2, came out a few months ago, I brought him a copy of it. And we went to the Will Eisner exhibit, which was great. And she and Philippe started talking. And it was like, I would never suggest I should be in the show. But they kind of put this germ together in each other's minds. And it was like, okay, well, maybe he can come in here. And and so I brought a lot of art. I brought 35 pieces, which eventually got narrowed down to 25. And the room expanded, so we had more space for pieces. And okay, well, I see why this is valuable. And, so I guess in that sense, it's like being a custodian, not just for my art, but for comics where they are today, I think. So that's kind of, that was kind of the idea. How
often are you actually there at the exhibition? Have you spent multiple days there, or do you show up kind of one day to sort of celebrate with everybody?
No, I'm there regularly at this point. I'm there at least once or twice a week. We're ongoing at this point. We get together. We have stuff to do. I work on things with them, and I'm going back on the 8th. And then, so it's just, what's interesting is you got let's say 3 quadrants at this point. So it's me working as a cartoonist, me working with Felix Liu, my art rep, and that's a whole other side of it. And then having a gallery, it's like there's so much more involved in having a gallery. It's a space, you have people, it's an event, you have to plan for everything. And it's like, it's a lot. And so it's like, wow, learning how to do all those things.
Have you had any of your artist friends come visit you or at the exhibition while you're there?
Yeah, a number of them. It's been great. And I think it's very exciting because we're at a point in time where an artist can show, Chelsea is kind of where like major artists show. And like there's a gallery that's dedicated to illustration and comic book art, and people are taking it seriously. And we're on the map now. I think that's been a beautiful thing, though. And I don't mind like being kind of the front man for that because, I think it's going to mean better things for more people later. Mm-hmm. And it elevates the art.
I feel like you are seamlessly transitioning me with each of my questions because my next question was actually going to be when you first got in the medium in the 90s, it kind of felt like, and of course I was young, so I don't remember what this is like, but just from what I understand, comics were just still considered, for kids, a little bit of a throwaway medium, right?
It's trash.
But, in today's world, even outside of a lot of the hits within Hollywood, comics are revered as a much more of a higher quality of a medium. Yeah. Like, how do you react to that? And you, like you said, you're sort of at the forefront of it all. How does that feel?
Well, the first thing I would say is something my dad always told me, the Pope rule is don't believe your own bullshit. So number one, that's number one rule. No, number one rule of rock and roll is you're bigger than the shit you're in. Number two is don't believe your own bullshit. So it's like, okay, well, I see myself as a figure so yeah, I'm at this place, this time, it's great, whatever. I've always believed that comics is a legitimate art form, and it was so frustrating being in college. And like, there are certain artists that were allowed into the curriculum or the canon, and certain artists that weren't. And I would always ask them, like, when I was back in school for painting and printmaking, like, we could look at Andy Warhol, we could look at Ansel Kiefer or David Salle or somebody. But I was like, well, what about Jack Kirby? Like, can we look at Jack? Like, no, that's comic books. And then it's like, okay, well, then is it merely money? Like, do you just want to see some money? Here's Frank Frazetta, motherfucker. You happy now?
Sure.
Yeah. But then it's like, that's not enough. It's like, okay, this is based on Roy Krenkel, and it's based on, Frederick and the German Romanicists, and like you take it further back if you want, Michelangelo. So yeah, I can speak that language, but it's like there is something that's very special to comics that makes it a different art medium. The French call it the ninth, right? We already have dance, poetry, literature, music, right? Go on the line. And then eventually comics is something, it's a weird hybrid of storytelling and picture making. And I think it's its own medium. It's special. It really is.
Absolutely. I was watching, I feel like we've talked about Frank Miller a couple times now here in this conversation. And I was actually watching his documentary, American Genius, a couple months ago. And in the doc, it actually has him accepting an award there in France. And I just wish, like, I don't know what the equation is. I don't know how you compare these two, but it seems like, as you just mentioned a moment ago, the French have fully like embraced the medium as like a true pillar art form. And it just kind of feels like, in some ways, it almost feels like manga has overtaken American comics in this realm in America. You know what I mean? Do you feel that at all? Or am I wrong? Am I off base there?
I do, but I have a theory about this. Okay. Having worked in all of these different realms, North America is a plurality of many different cultures. And I don't think there's one identifying American culture. Like you and I might say we came from the Midwest, right? Or somebody says, I'm from Tennessee. That's supposed to mean something. I'm from LA. I'm from Seattle.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, And then it's like a little country like Japan or Belgium or France, they're always an identity that's independent. Like we're French. We have French food. We have French language. We have French jokes. We have French history in terms of the wars we had with the English. Mm-hmm. The English hate the French hate the English, the Belgians hate the French. It's like North America, I'm going to say, because this is a very large continent. Canada and Mexico are also America, right? So we have that. So regional, I'll put it this way, regional identity of cultural context through comics is specific to each country in Europe. So in Italy, we have Diabolic, we have Corto, we have Tex, right? We have certain characters like this. We have Mickey Mouse. Those things have worked there. The French have a different thing. You know, we have what they call the big feet, you know, Goscinny and these artists. And then, of course, in Belgium, if you spend any time in Brussels, you are going to be forced to draw Tintin. And that's why Mobius is so important, because he's like the Jimi Hendrix comics, put it that way. I mean, like, this is a dude that reinvented himself. And he's the Mobius strip. It's like, whoa. Realizing that at a very young age to me was like, whoa, that's incredible. So I think with North America, we have the distinctive, because we are a melting pot, we can take European comics or Asian. I'm going to spread it out and say Asian comics. We have a lot of comics visible. And the history of American comics, like whether you got into Image Comics or TMNT or Bronze Age or Silver Age, or, you know, the classics, whatever. We as North Americans are in a very special place because we have access to lots and lots of visual storytelling tools, which I think are harder. You know, a guy I work with is in Kuwait right now, and, you know, it's hard for him to get Western comics. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to get a package for you and send it. And like, you know, do I have to put any special like label on this to make sure that you're not going to get busted? It's just like normal comic book stuff.
Yeah, it's contraband. They're trying to smuggle it.
Could be.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah. My North Star goal as a comic book reader is eventually get overseas and get it into, I would just say Europe in general, and just sort of visit the comic shops there, see how much they differ from LCSs here in the US. And you know, but also specifically go to Thought Bubble, because I've been to San Diego. So again, we're recording this on July 1st. And real quick, Paul, you're going to be at San Diego here in a couple of weeks?
No, I'm not doing anything. I'm in my chess board year.
Yeah.
So I'll be out there again. But
you got to put your head down and work. I get it.
Also, multiple projects in the works. So they'll come out in their time.
Yeah. Well, so I've been to San Diego 4 times, New York 5 times, C2E2 multiple times. Never been to Thought Bubble. That's like my ultimate goal. So, you know, and a good friend of the show, Christian Ward, is often bugging me to get out there and visit him there.
I know him.
Yeah, Christian's a good guy. So I would love to at some point get over there and visit him, and also go to Thought Bubble, and also just experience what it's like for comic readers over there. You know.
Well, if you do go there, when I went there actually, and when I went, my dad is a huge fan of the Who, as he calls them, the Horrible Who. And they have a famous record that was recorded in Leeds, live at Leeds, which is at the university, in the cafeteria. And it's a great album. It's so good. It's a great rock and roll record. And my one request was, can we go to the cafeteria at the University of Leeds to see where the Who played? And we did.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's great.
Okay. So here's a quick question for you. This is a slight deviation because I do want to get back to Le Bon at some point. But you mentioned the Who. I'm assuming you're a fan. I already know you're a fan of the Grateful Dead because you've done work for them.
No, I'm not. Well, I mean, I like working with them. I'm a little more of the Led Zeppelin.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Thing. I mean, you know, I know a couple of the hits of the Grateful Dead, but you don't have to know the music to work on the stuff.
Yeah.
I still respect them. But
yeah.
I think
I should have assumed. I guess I should. Yeah. But I guess my question was going to be, that seems to be like 2 of the only bands that have performed at the Sphere in Las Vegas. And I was going to ask you if you had any interest in doing that at all, like going and seeing them.
No, I don't, but I'm interested in applications for AI. And I know U2 did a big residency there, and I do like U2. But I mean, I'm Gen X, so it kind of goes with territory.
Sure.
But, you know, I feel like I'm a little bit more of a detached thinker when it comes to art applications and like how you can merge music or visuals with art. And so I'm interested in seeing that. But just growing up, I never got into the Dead. It wasn't really on my radar, you know.
Sure.
More of a Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin type guy.
Yeah. That's totally fair. Honestly, I was part of the generation that everyone got the new U2 album on their iTunes. I don't know if you remember that from like 2000 and like
Yeah,
7.
dude. I have it as well. I've never listened to it. Something about that was really like, I didn't really
doesn't seem kosher.
Like, yeah, when you go to a restaurant, they bring you out some like little thing in the beginning, like, oh, you didn't ask for this, but here we brought you this salad.
Right.
Like, oh, thank you very much. But it's like when you get a U2 record, you kind of like, I didn't ask for this.
Right. Well, I want to go back just a little bit to Le Bon. You were mentioning how you had to siphon down a couple pieces. And again, we already mentioned that there's a bunch of personal pieces, some never before seen pieces that you've worked on. I was curious, and I know I keep asking you big questions here, but is there a particular piece or a set of pieces that you were especially excited to share with this new exhibit?
Sorry, I feel like my shirt is really.
I was going to ask you to unbutton it a little bit more. Just do like 5 buttons if you could.
Well, it's you have to understand. It's like let me paint a picture for y'all.
Yeah,
it is about 100 degrees. It is about 100 degrees in my apartment. So yeah, excuse me for unbuttoning my shirt. One button a little too far. Well, I wanted to make sure that there was a wide range of art in the show, and I felt like it was important. Have a piece from Spider-Man, a piece from Batman, and then my creator-owned stuff like 100% the boxing story, things like that. And then I wanted to have a couple of pieces in there that kind of like maybe reflected more about like what I think about as an artist, because I do work in comics as an art medium, not just commercial medium, right? And so I wanted to be able to make sure that there was a range of things.
And you mentioned that there were about 10 that you had to sort of piece off. Is there one in that pile that you were like, man, why couldn't I at least keep that one? Or you had to go to someone else to tell you which one to get rid of?
Well, I mean, when it comes to working with a gallerist like Philippe, I trust him. He's had maybe 40 shows. He's shown some prominent artists. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to bring in more than he needs, because I want to just sit down with him and see what he thinks is good. And we went through everything. It was an interesting conversation. And he pulled a few things out. I was like, wow, I'm surprised he pulled that one out, because I thought that was definitely going to be it. And just see how he narrows it down. And, a gallery knows their audience or knows how to attract certain people. And it's not just like a hustle. It's like, you want to share the art and the love of the art. Maybe if you like the art, maybe buy the book, and the book is going to show you this like history of an artist, that kind of thing, So I treat it like a very genuine, not just like, oh, look at us, like, rubbing my hands like an oil salesman. Like, look at me, I'm making money, that kind of thing. Like, I'm just trying to actually like share the art form. Like, if you walk down 24th Street in Chelsea, there's some confusing art in the windows. It's like, okay, I'm going to walk into this gallery, look at this art. It might be a painting or a sculpture or something. And I'm a guy who went to school, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, I understand like maybe some of the rhetoric of what they're trying to go for. But it's like, I don't understand what the hell this is supposed to mean. But if you go into Le Bon Gallery and you see a drawing of a wolf on the wall, that's literally a drawing of a wolf. There's no extra secret sauce in this. It's a drawing of a wolf.
I'm a simple man. I love a drawing of a wolf. All right. I don't need much more than that.
That's one of the things about that gallery. Of course, the art can be more oblique and different things, but like a lot of comics is just very direct. Whether you're writing it or you're getting a script, it's like usually it's like Spider-Man's flying in over the Chrysler building or something, and just make that the best image you can make it. As opposed to like, I'm trying to draw this complicated image of my mother's psychology, and I'm sitting in a high chair or something, like something like that. It's like, that's a little more complex.
Yeah.
And I'm not downselling comic books as lowbrow.
I don't think anyone's going to accuse you of that.
I just think it's direct.
Yeah.
It's direct. That's the beauty of it. It's direct.
What's funny is I was going to ask you what the connection was between your mother's psychology and Batman. I know that there's a link there, but I just wasn't sure. And
there isn't.
There actually isn't.
That's right. That's right. There's a turtle, Leon. He's flipped over in the desert. Right. I'll tell you about my mother. Remember that? Blade Runner reference.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Okay. So I promise you, this is not an attempt to flip the conversation on its head, but
I know it's fine, dude. I'm not worried, man. Look at me.
This is a more broad warning.
I'm actually enjoying our conversation.
That is the best compliment that I could ever receive. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Good. Oh, yeah.
But, again, rereading Batman Year 100, my gosh, what a more relevant piece of work right now, for the US and where we're at currently in 2025 with a force like the Wolves and the Panthers. Do you have a time machine? How long did that take you to create that?
No, thank you for acknowledging that. I mean, I think the holy grail for science fiction writers is to be able to write something that is going to be prescient in the future. So I thought about, like, when I read Flow My Tears, by Philip Dick or Scanner Darkly, like some of these strange visions, or even like, Strange Visions. I just referenced Arlen Ellison for that one. But, some of the stuff we see in science fiction, whether it's Watchmen, I mean, I think there's I don't want to say it in a cynical way. Like, I think the real meat of writing science fiction with comics is to have a predictive sense of where our society is going. So yeah, I mean, when I wrote Batman Year 100, I mean, it was not too far after 9/11 and the Patriot Act, and I was kind of like, okay, well, let me imagine like where this might go 20 years from now. And then it's like, what is a superhero at that point?
Mm-hmm.
If everyone is identified, so that was, I mean, thank God DC let me do it. They were kind of unsure, but like, no, look, it's the force of charisma. I'm like, look, no, I'll make this happen. I'll make this work. Don't worry, this will happen.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Agreed. And I think I would be pressed to find many Batman fans that wouldn't put Year 100 in at least their top 10. Like, it is an all-timer for sure. And you've won multiple Eisners for it. Its legacy will outlive all of us, I think. And I'm so happy that DC Editorial, gave you that green light.
Yeah. What's really weird is, like, you think about being an artist, it's like, I remember when I was in my teens, for example, you think a lot about, like, oh my God, this crisis of, like, I'm going to die young, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Like my heroes, Jim Morrison, Arthur Rimbaud, like this kind of thing. And it's like, then you live past that and you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. I have something I have to say about society and the world we live in. Then you take on that mantle, which is, I think, a bigger mantle, because you're not dealing with that like usual chaotic adolescent anxiety. Like, okay, well, let me think about society and where we are today. And so that's the way I approach comic books, is like, I write science fiction. It just happens to be comics.
Yeah. And you've often noodled on this, a couple ideas that we're sort of living in today. I mean, we've got irregulated AI is becoming more and more of a thing. As you mentioned a moment ago,
Uh-huh.
Silicon Valley is influencing our government. I mean, those are just a couple things. Part of me, as a fan of yours and as someone, your minor, I want to be like, Paul, tell me what to do here. But it's one of those things that I'm just curious how you stay so humble and don't constantly proclaim, I told you guys all this was going to happen. Like, just wear it as a t-shirt.
Well, because I'm not an asshole. I mean, like I told you, man, the Pope's rules of rock and roll. Don't believe your own bullshit. You're bigger than the shit you're in.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with that. That was my dad's rule.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, look, son, this is what you have to do. I'm like, okay, I listened to him. But man, I mean, comic books are a small piece of the big puzzle, and nobody gets into comics trying to get rich. I mean, you do it, like, if you have success, it's great, but you're trying to tell stories about the world and people, and you try to make pictures that make people feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And trying to connect with people who are like you. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I don't know, it's funny. It's like that maybe that's a certain psychology, and other people are attracted to other types of work or other goals, or, conquests or whatever they're thinking about. But I think comics is kind of pure. It's like, like I'm interested in telling stories. I'm interested in drawing and connection. And that's kind of what it is to me.
Mm-hmm. You're circling something that I feel like I've always loved about the medium. There's a certain level of community and fellowship that goes along with reading comics. You guys are, even as someone like yourself who's had an incredible career, is obviously still accessible in some ways. There are not other mediums like comics. And the one thing, I think the number one thing I love about it is that, and I'm taking this from a friend of mine who often says this, is that comics deserve and require our participation. If we don't participate in the good, then it will be overrun by those who may want to besmirch it, excuse me, or, of something like that.
That's an interesting, I never thought about that. That's interesting to think about engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of think like from one side as an artist, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to make a statement and I'm just going to put it out there. Like I told a story, like whatever it might be. And then you don't need response from people, but to know that it connects with people, and then it kind of changes the dialogue over time, right? Like if you think about it, like, let me just come up with a silly example, like Alien or The Matrix, like, these certain touch points in culture where science fiction or fantasy stories or science horror, whatever we call it, they change the way people think about the world we live in. That's kind of the dialogue I think that we do. It's just faster now than it used to be.
Sure. Something I've always really appreciated about your work, and this is sort of my round of the conversation, my round, what I say, like rounding third here, I guess. And something I've always appreciated about your work is that, outside of the obvious, your priority, it seems, has been to establish this, emotional theme within a piece. Right? You recently elaborated on this kind of idea with the Comics Journal, and I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna read a direct quote from you in that piece. And I do recommend people to go read this themselves. I will have a link for it in the show notes. You say here that a lot of my life has been spent trying to gain this aptitude to be able to draw through pictures, to depict through pictures what I see in my mind, as we already spoke about here in this conversation. A lot of the times it goes beyond realism and beyond trying to make someone laugh, beyond impressing someone with a detailed drawing. It's about actually getting across an emotional state, hopefully reaching other people so that they can see and feel the same way or get sparked to feel their own things. I absolutely love that thought, Paul. And this is my final question for you, and it kind of deals with this quote here. This might be a big one too, so I apologize. I feel like I've been hitting you with a lot of big questions here in this conversation, but I got to take advantage of
I'm
the
an
situation.
intellectual. We can do this.
Do you believe that there is a hierarchy between how the viewer feels about your finished piece compared to how you felt while creating it and ultimately trying to invoke with it?
Great question. I don't think it's a hierarchy. I would say it is a screen. So the artist might have an intention and might say something or do something creatively, and then that's put into the ether, right? And then the viewership or the readers or other artists or however you want to say it, they have the freedom to be able to interpret it. And they might say, well, this is crap. This guy's fucked up and he's just not any good anymore. Or they might say, my God, this is the best thing I've ever read. I can't believe it. This is going to stay with me for the rest of my life. Oh my God, I'm crying. That kind of thing. And it's like that is the freedom of interpretation. And even me, like if I look at something I like a lot, whether like I listen to use an obvious example, Hendrix's cover of Along the Watchtower.
Yeah.
I do go back to that once in a while, and I'm like listening to it. And it's so interesting that certain pieces of art, whether it's music or paintings or film or poetry, whatever, it can keep growing with you. And other things, like, okay, to use a music example, Jane's Addiction. I really love Jane's Addiction. That first record, Nothing Shocking. Well, they had one before that, but Nothing Shocking was a major label. And that sounds so good. But when I listen to it, it sounds like me being 18 years old.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than me listening to music that keeps altering and changing. And I think that maybe, depending on the artist, I think that maybe the goal is to make something that's going to keep growing with the audience or the reader or the listener or the viewer, something like that. Because that's the kind of art I like.
Absolutely.
It keeps growing. Yeah, it keeps growing.
It's funny, and just to sort of keep on the musical theme of it all, my favorite band of all time is Daft Punk. And as a kid, Discovery, of course, it's an all-timer for a lot of people. I think that may have been my favorite as a young person. But as I've gotten older, and I think this is purposeful based on their growth as a band as well, is Random Access Memories, which unfortunately became their last album, as I think maybe possibly become my favorite now. And I'm often sort of wondering why. maybe it's a more mature sounding sound, or maybe I listened to Discovery too much, or maybe there's something to what you're saying here, which is that I've just sort of grown to it, and parts of me have sort of been changing with it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like if I think about, the other night I did a deep dive on Nick Cave, one of my favorite performers and songwriters, musicians, stuff. And some of it holds up. Some of it to me doesn't. Some of it I heard in a different way. Like every once in a while, like maybe once a month, I do like this deep dive on music. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go into like Zeppelin, or I'm going to go into Rachmaninoff or something, or whatever it might be, and just listen to it, because I come up with all kinds of visuals in my mind. And you listen to stuff and it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Like maybe it's the lyrics, maybe it's the sound, maybe it doesn't quite hit you because you're at a different phase of life. But I mean, the one thing I really believe about art is that it's never nihilistic. You can always find an access point to art. And, we work in the ninth art, right? Which is one of the classical arts. We don't work in dance, poetry. But I mean, we can combine all those things because we're at the ninth, and the ninth inherits all the eighth. So I don't know. That's how I think. And as a music appreciator or art appreciator, I really get into all kinds of stuff. And it's like, might find myself in some weird tangent where I'm listening to like Tito Puente and like something I can't even get down from Amazon or from iTunes or whatever. And it's like, wow, this is like a really rare track I just discovered, but it's cool. And it's like, it's really hitting me, And then like that whatever the little breadcrumb is in there, you can put it back into your work, whether it's, journalism or comics or whatever it might be. And it's like, something new. And I think that's the exciting thing about art.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about this too. This is the last thing I'll say, because you mentioned before about how with Pulp Hope, you wanted to include a lot of like never before seen, and we keep talking about this, like never before seen, work from you that hasn't been published, and how you often will get extremely excited when you find something never before seen from someone you really, revere. And I feel terrible because we barely talked about Pulp Hope 2, which is coming out through Boom Studios, everybody. So make sure you go grab that.
Yeah, sure.
But that seems to be a main goal for you with this new art book.
Well, look, man, I mean, one day we're all going to die, right? It's not to get dark. However,
let's end it right here. Perfect. Everyone's going to die. We'll see y'all later.
Wait. If this is my last attempt at having an artistic statement, I want to make sure that everything I did is there. Not because I'm such an egomaniac. It's just more like, here's the trajectory of an artist. Mm-hmm. And like I started drawing little ridiculous pictures with like a ballpoint pen. Like my dad liked the Beatles, so I drew pictures of the Beatles. And then like, I watched Batman on TV, and so I would draw Batman and, stuff like that. And it's like, okay, then where do you go after that? Then it turns into something else. And I think that's such a generous thing, because when I meet younger artists today, like artists we might say are like Gen Z or like younger artists, and they ask kind of questions that I find sort of agonizing, like, should I draw or should I just go into like digital? I'm like, well, it depends on what you want. But, all the questions about like, why would you pick up a tool like this and start doing it? And like the muscle memory and all the stuff that you have to do to make a drawing, it's not easy. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of in for it for a while. That's what you're going to do. I don't think kids know. Kids don't really know, because, when you're a kid, you're 7 years old. I mean, the summer is a lifetime.
Well, I'll tell you, Paul, I think that is an incredible way to end the conversation. And I feel like since you were 7 and drawing those Beatle pictures, you've come quite a long ways, both in terms of, this exhibition and this Pulp Hope 2 and everything that you've done in your career. You're a 5-time Eisner winner. I mean, not that awards are everything, but that's still an insanely incredible achievement. And I just feel so honored to have the opportunity to chat with you here today. It was an absolute pleasure having you here on the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Pleasure for me too, because, dialogue is a two-way thing. And I have a new work coming up. We should have a conversation down the road too.
I would love that.
Like when the new things are out. I've been spending 10 years in the wilderness working on new stuff nobody even knows about. So it'll arrive. It'll manifest.
Do not threaten me with a good time. Anytime you want the second chair on the Oblivion Bar, it is yours, Paul. I promise you. Do you mind if I fanboy for like 10 seconds really quick?
Sure.
All right. I was going to say that, you are a living icon and a trailblazer. And I feel so incredibly bummed that I can't be there in New York to see this exhibition. But for the listeners that are on the East Coast, I highly recommend them. July 26th is the last day that you can go see this exhibition for Paul Pope there. And I will tell you, again, as I just mentioned a moment ago, Pulp Hope 2, all the information for both the exhibition and Pulp Hope 2 will be in the show notes. So everyone listen to this, please go check those out. And, Paul, again, I'm so grateful to have you here today. And before I let you go, is there anything that you want to say to the listener? Is there anything you want to sort of, hybrid plug or anything else?
I mean, I guess I would probably say I really believe in positive mental attitude, and I believe in faith. And I don't mean denominational faith and your God versus my God, that kind of thing. But whoever you are listening to this out there, the artists, the dreamers, just keep going, man. PMA, positive mental attitude. Keep believing in yourself. Keep believing in your art and your friends. That's what I have to say.
I love it. Perfect way to end the conversation, Paul. What a pleasure. I'd love to have you back on the show if you have the availability.
Let's do it.
And
let's do it for sure.
We'll talk to you soon. Congratulations on everything, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right, brother. Thank you very much.
All righty. There's that conversation with Paul Pope. Once again, thank you so much to Paul for coming onto the show. Really appreciate it. Again, Aaron, I've told you this before, but I don't like to assume a position in someone's life. I don't want to assume that we're friends with some of these. We always want to befriend these creators when they come on the show. Of course, if they want to be friends with us, we will absolutely take that every single time. But we don't want to assume that we're friends, right? Because they could just be coming on wanting to chat about comics and promote their work or whatever. I legitimately thought that at the end of this conversation, little peek behind the curtain, everybody, Paul and I chatted for 40 minutes after this conversation. We just wanted to keep talking about comics and his career and everything that he's doing and comics today and music. What an incredible guy. Very, very grateful to have Paul on the show. Again, his exhibit over at the Philippe Leblanc Gallery in New York City is open until July 26th. So make sure you guys, if you're in the New York area, if you're I would say even on the East Coast, take a train over to New York City, go check that out. Aaron, you're in Brooklyn, actually in the same, area as Paul. Any interest? Are you eventually going to try to figure out a way to go check out this exhibit there at LeBlanc?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I hope that
I'm excited.
Take a bunch of pictures for us. We'll post them online. If you see Paul, you'd be like, "Hey, I'm the other half of the Oblivion Bar."
Hey, Paul.
Paulie.
Mr. Pope.
One thing we didn't really get to, Aaron, in this conversation that I kind of wish we would have, and I'll sort of plug it here at the end, is that Pulp Hope 2, which is his new art book that's coming out. I'm sorry, it has already come out. And I think people should go get that. It's through Boom Studios. It's also in collaboration with this exhibit. A lot of the work that he was sort of piecing together for this exhibit was already kind of organized because he was working on Pulp Hope 2. So highly recommend people go grab that. Recently came out. Definitely something I'm going to be grabbing. And just excited. Paul mentions at one point in this conversation, Aaron, that he is working on a couple things that he'll be announcing here soon, maybe around San Diego and New York Comic-Con. So he mentioned that he would love to come back on the show when those things eventually get announced. So,
well, duh.
I'm honestly kind of I'm smitten for sure.
You got a little crush?
Yeah. I mean, I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to talk to someone like Paul, but all these creators, every time we get to talk to one of these creators, Paul Pope or anyone else, and just if this is their first comic, it's the greatest part about having this show. Outside of getting to hang out with you, my best friend, and talk about all these things that we love, I would say a very close second would be talking to these creators, picking their brain on their process and their careers and what they have upcoming. And gosh, I'm feeling really grateful today is all I'm saying, I guess. So,
yeah, practically glowing with your appreciation.
And Aaron, you weren't here for this conversation. Where the hell were you at?
I don't remember. It's just not available.
I wasn't available. I had Do Not Disturb on. I don't know.
Yes.
You were getting prepared for next week, Aaron, because next week on the show, we are talking about Superman. And
yes.
Now, I don't know if listeners are privy to that small indie film that's coming out from a little studio called DC Studios.
No, I don't, it's not ringing a bell.
No, not really tracking that one.
Ding, ding, ding.
What if I told you
the bell has been rung?
What if I told you it was from a small director called James Gunn?
Still
nothing.
I was doing a reference to the end of the last Superman movie with Lex Luthor in the prison. He's like, the bell's been rung.
The redcoats are coming.
Yeah.
The redcoats are coming. Hopefully this movie is much better than that one. I'll tell you. I don't know how people feel. I don't know how the listeners feel about Zack Snyder's Justice League, but this is the new era of DC Studios. And, we are nothing if not.
Era.
What was that? Sorry.
Era.
The DC era. I'm very excited for this brand new era of DC Studios. Okay, end of bit, Aaron. Let's be serious. Okay, we're talking about Superman here. Talking about the Man of Tomorrow, Man of Steel. Live long and prosper. I'm doing the Star Trek thing, everybody.
Just do them together.
Not the same property, Chris.
Spock scissor.
We're getting a little loopy, everybody. We just did a grid before this. Next week on the show, episode 199, we were talking about Superman. And Aaron, I don't know if you heard me just say episode 199, but that can only mean one thing.
200.
200. We're almost at 200. And
keep it 100 tight.
100 squared, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's the power of 2.
And then when we get to 300, it'll be 100 cubed.
Yeah.
Math, baby.
Math. I fucking hate it.
We'll be together for this 200th episode. Very exciting. Excited to see my BFF.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll see you the next week at San Diego, which is coming up as well.
I'm going to give you a big smooch.
Big old smooch?
Yeah, right on the lips. Even if I'm still sick.
You shouldn't be, hopefully. But that's next week on the show, everybody. A lot of things happening in July, Aaron. We have an extremely busy month, but I'm excited. A lot of fun things. Fantastic Four at the end of the month. We've got an interview with Tony McMillan on the docket. Ethan Parker and Griffin Sheridan both are going to be on the show here soon.
Godzilla.
So a lot of things happening, Aaron. It's exciting.
It's an exciting time to be a comic book nerd.
Yes, very much so. So that'll do it for episode 198. Once again, thank you, Paul Pope, for joining us. Can't wait to have him back on the show. Aaron, please take us out of here.
All right. Subscribe to our podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Boom. There we are. Thank you to our patrons, Alex, Alice, Aaron, Botter, Chris S, Chris Y, Christy, David, Elliot, Erica, George, Gianni, Greg, Haley, Ham6, Jake, Jeremy, Kyle, Losi, Mike, Miles, Mike, Livia, Ryan, I, Robert, Saunter, Sebastian, Sean, Trevor, Travis, Zach, and Brad and Lisa. If you want to support the show without spending a single dime/penny, a follow on your preferred podcasting platform and a 5-star rating and or a review on an Apple Podcast and Spotify helps the show a flippin' ton.
Yeah.
Okay. Follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitch at Oblivion Bar Pod. Follow official merch of the show can be found on our website, oblivionbarpodcast.com. A big thank you to Oni Press and Endless Comics, Games, and Cards for sponsoring the show. Thank you, KXD Studios, for all of our Oblivion Bar art. He's at KXD Graphics on Instagram. And thank you, Dream Kid, for all of our musical themes. Thank you, DJ Skyvac, for our grid theme. And last but not least, don't forget to tip your bartenders, servers, waiters, waitresses, bus boys, valet attendants, anybody that deserves
valet?
to get them. Valet? Did I say valet?
I don't know. But you might have said
maybe 20% or more. Don't be a dick.
Don't be a real dick. All right.
Don't be a real murder bot.
You know, Paul Pope always tips 20%. I already know. I didn't ask him. We obviously didn't talk about it in the episode, but
at least
I'm 100% positive. At least. Bare minimum, as you should as well. So thank you all so much for listening to the Oblivion Bar this week. We appreciate it. We will see you next week for episode 199 of the show.